Showtime. Hey, it's 7 o'clock Central Standard Time on a Monday, so you know what that means. It's time for your weekly installment of SCV Chat. Before we get everything under the way, let's get our normal disclaimer out of the way. The views and opinions expressed on this program are not necessarily the views and opinions of the National Sons of Confederate Veterans, any division, brigade, camp, or other subsidiary. Strictly the opinions of us who are giving them. Speaking of giving opinions to the panel, hey guys, how's y'all's weeks?
I started back college. Ask me again in a couple months.
Busy.
Harrison's a little suicidal. It is. I got to do my favorite thing as division commander this past week, and that is swear someone in as an officer. So that was the highlight of my weekend. J-Bo, how are you?
I'm doing well, young man. How about yourself?
Doing good. Any worldly observations you've made lately you want to share with the world?
Well, if y'all want me to make those observations.
Think about your health, J-Bo. Think about your health.
We'll say, yeah. We'll save them. We'll save them for the behind episode.
Okay. Yeah. When we do one of those, when we're doing those extras, then I'll voice my opinion on something.
Yeah.
Or just an observation I saw. Yeah.
Really quickly. Yeah. Really quickly, because he can't be with us for the full time tonight. We're gonna go ahead and kick things over to very interesting things from that he wanted to announce on the show. So, Adam, flow is yours.
All right. Thank you, Connor. Just a reminder, if you go to your Confederate Veteran magazine, on the front flap, you can see the application for Friends of the Museum. On page 62, you can join the Friends of Elm Springs. So a lot of people have taken advantage of that and sent in their memberships. So we appreciate it. Keep them coming in, y'all. We have a lot of great things going on at Elm Springs. This past weekend was great. We had a very busy Saturday. Some Boy Scouts came by for a tour of the house, so I was glad to show them around. And we also had the UDC ladies renting our room at Elm Springs, which is great. This room's staying kind of popular. If you don't know, we have the old conference room at Elm Springs. You can rent it out for your private parties, private events, small showers, birthday showers, or wedding showers, whatever you want to do within reason, you can do in this room. If you're interested in the area, want to rent it out, just give us a call at headquarters. We can set that up. And which brings us on to our next thing. In the rental room on the 13th I think the 12th of February, we're having a dessert party at Elm Springs, which is our latest fundraiser there to raise some money for the house and its continued restoration. For $15 per person or $25 per couple, you can come and taste all of you want to. Take a light tour of the house. So looking forward to that one. Of course, I'm always one for sweets. So are there any questions? Be glad to answer them. If not, just check us out on Facebook, Historic Elm Springs, and we're also
looking at the side.
Yeah, come and have your birthday party with us, Vincent. All right, y'all. All right, we all have a good show.
Harrison did links in the chat, so when the episode is over, definitely go and click on them. And but Harrison did post those in the chat, so you guys can You guys can click on them after the show, of course, and definitely everything that we can do to help Elm Springs and everything is great. If you've been paying attention to the news coming out of that area where headquarters is, you know that we've had some problems with Franklin and some other, or the Battle of Franklin Trust and some other areas. Matt wanted to talk about an issue with, I believe, Ripavilla. Matt?
Well, yeah. So the other day, the Spring Hill Board of Commissioners, I guess you call them, they're called aldermen down there. I don't know why politicians got to change their name, all dirty politicians. Anyway, they voted to kick the nonprofit organization Ripavilla Inc. out of Ripavilla, which is the home of my camp, the Cheers camp. And so now we're looking for a new home to meet in Spring Hill. We want to keep it in Spring Hill, but this it opens up the door for some of our naysayers to get in there. Our friend in Franklin's name was dropped a lot during that time. So the good news is I did talk to some of the board members from Ripavilla Inc. that manage the property, and they're going to try to get a lawyer and see what they can fight it on that. But right now, as of right now, we have 90 days to vacate the property at Ripavilla.
Well, we'll definitely.
See, I think
it's hard enough.
You know, they start getting footholds down here around where headquarters is, and then start pushing on our board of commissioners in Murray County, and then we lose our foothold here. It's a never-ending freaking fight down here, man. And that's you guys. I know a lot of people always want to know what National's doing. What are y'all doing locally? That's where we really got to get back to. I worry more about the stuff I do. Somebody called me and told me, "Hey, man, the federal government's trying to change names in parks." Well, man, I got fights right here in Tennessee. I got to fight. I can't fight every fight. So we got to be smarter. You start at a lower level, work your way up. Don't worry about the federal government. They're going to screw themselves eventually. Worry about what you got to do right here in your hometown. Man, I mean, Ripavilla and Elm Springs, all this around here, that's important to me. This is my home. I want to make sure my history is preserved right here at the house. I mean, trust me, I want to do it all over the nation, but I got to worry about what's right here in front of me. These are the battles that I can fight. These are battles I can be in. You know, focus all that attention that you focus on the federal government right here and fight at your local levels. That's where it starts. You got to get your local levels. Federal government ain't going to listen to you. They ain't going to listen to me. But your local government, they got to listen to you. They got to listen to you. You're a small man. They're small people. Make them listen to you.
And Matt, you are so right with that. Any place that we have that camps are active and camps are doing well and camps are fighting this, we have more success than if there's nobody there. And we have to focus locally. Now, here I am. I live right here in Middle Tennessee. You had me up speaking at the Battle of Spring Hill deal. While I was there, I joined the Ripavilla membership, you know, to try to help the house. And next thing I know, the money that I contribute to that, next thing I know, they're throwing out the group that I joined that was running it. And now what's happening now, we don't know, because they don't even have a contingency plan, if I understand correctly. They're just taking plan. And the group that is in there that's running it and taking care of it and is promoting it and doing everything that they should be doing, they just come in and throw them out without having anybody else there. They don't know what they're doing. There is no contingency plan. There is no plan B. There is no replacement. Maybe they have one in mind and they just don't want to say at this point, which is the biggest fear that we can have. But that's something that we all have to fight locally. And yes, we need support from all over the nation, and I want to support people from all over the nation. But we have fights. We all have fights local. Know your town mayor. Know your town alderman and city council. Make sure they know you. Go to their council meetings. You know, anything that's happening in your city and in your county. make sure they know you. If you don't know
Mhm.
who they are and they don't know who you are, you probably need to rectify that situation rapidly. So
Listen, you got to network in these small towns too. You got to get out there and start to get to know people. Join these local clubs. Get in there, find out who the movers and shakers are, and start networking yourself. That's what you got to do. You build a good reputation, they'll help you. That's where you got to start, man. You got to have, but you got to get your foot in the door first. You got to get your foot in the door. You know?
Yeah, you got to start on the grassroots
And speaking
level.
of building a good reputation, I want to brag on. Yeah. Am I coming in clear, guys? Kind of.
Yeah, I got you.
Okay. But speaking about, the grassroots and the local level and getting in and building your own local reputation, I want to talk about a project that my own camp is working on right now. Last year, we partnered with Camp RAD, which is a camp for kids with muscular dystrophy. And we raised $5,400 to send kids to this camp. This year, we're partnering with Camp Rainbow, which is a camp for kids with cancer, which no child should ever have to fight cancer. It's a hard enough disease on adults, and really no child should have to, go through with that. But we want to be able to sponsor some kids again this year to be able to go to camp, to get some normalcy back in their lives, and really enjoy it while they can. On the bottom of the screen, you'll see the information for my camp's PayPal, as well as our website. You can either PayPal us directly there, or we do have a PayPal button on our website. Definitely, if it's in your heart to donate, we will gladly that's how we win this. Like we've said, is building stuff on the on our local levels and supporting our communities. So that's the project I wanted to plug a little bit. That we're doing, and other camps can do something like that as well. There's something else you could partner with to help out and do that networking like we've discussed. So just gonna leave that up for a couple more seconds as I change over. But yeah. So today we plugged in some information, or we put a couple posts out on Facebook about things going with the future of the chat. If you've been following us, you know our story of always improvising and adapting and overcoming and trying to stay one step ahead of the cancel culture and PC stuff that's sweeping the nation. Well, we've seen what's been happening on this platform and other platforms, and honestly, our time may be limited. It could be that we could have it pulled out, or rug pulled out from under us tomorrow, and that's what we've been trying to move towards, a secure location. For the first time ever, we're broadcasting live on YouTube. So that hopefully, people who've left the platform and have migrated, have gotten word, they can still watch us. They can still get information that we're presenting out in episodes. We've also created a MeWe account, which is supposed to be the new alternative Facebook that a lot of people moved over to. You can go follow there. Right now, they do not have a way for us to broadcast live, so that's why we're continuing on with the YouTube thing. The overall goal is for us to, within the next couple of months, have our own website that we broadcast live with. That way, no matter what happens with social media, as long as that website stays up, we'll be able to broadcast live and reach y'all weekly. Because this is for the membership. This is for the people who haven't heard about the SCV and lovers of history everywhere, not just us. So yeah. Now, how we're going to be able to do that is it's going to take some help from y'all. We are looking at a couple of crowdfunding options. And one thing that we've started building is a Teespring account. If you're not familiar with Teespring, what it is we go in and we offer a design of a shirt or, in this case, T-shirts, long sleeve T-shirts, tank tops, things of that. You order from Teespring, they ship it directly to you, and we get part of the profits. The store is active right now. If you go, it's scrolling at the bottom of the page. If you go to teespring.com/store/scv-chat, you'll see a lot of things that we've been working on. One shirt in particular I want to mention because we've already had a couple of sales on. If you buy any of the products that are listed as NBF fundraiser, 100% of those proceeds are going to go back to the national organization to help with the funeral service, the relocation, everything, whatever it's needed for Nathan Bedford Forrest. 100% of those. The other shirt designs that are out there, half the money will go back to will go back to the organization to help with the museum. Hopefully, that's what we're gearing it towards. The other half will be stay in the chat so that we can get a get a good website up, get better connection, everything and anything, so we can continue this project going. So when the stream is over, and we'll paste the link in there a couple of times, y'all and look at there and look at that. So that's our plug. But like I said, anything that is listed under the NBF fundraising is 100% is going towards going to headquarters for the Bedford Forrest funeral, reinterment, everything. So so that's that. So consider helping the chat out. Help us get a more permanent location online, and get everything on there. Now, I do see somebody asked about can't this be broadcast on scv.org? That's something that we looked at, and we may in the future. But right now, just from talking to the other guys on the panel, our own individual website may be an easier thing, because the SCV has multiple websites. We've got scv.org, but we've also got the 1-800-MY-SOUTH website. So this would just be another way, another outlook and avenue for us. Something that is maybe easier to navigate than the SCV webpage for some folks. Only thing, if you saw the picture that we shared of it, that was the first teaser. You see there's a button on there that says click and watch live. Only thing you'll have to do is go to, hopefully the URL is not taken, but whatever the URL is, and then click watch live at 7 o'clock on Mondays. You won't have to be trying to navigate, and just easier to get the stuff. So that's that. Definitely, like I said, consider over there for all that. Now, Eddie, I see your question here about, I know you got issues with Facebook, the migration to MeWe, etc. Not sure if it's been brought up or not, but would it be feasible to put a forum on the national website for members? Potentially we could do that. We could look into it. Say again, Matt.
There's already one up there. It's in Salesforce. I'll tell you what. Next week, tune in, and I will have a whole spill on it. Show you how to do it, all that good stuff.
Yeah, but to answer that, if you look in the upper right-hand corner and everything we've been putting out lately, we've been talking about reclaiming the narrative 1 week at a time. And I was talking to Michael, who's sitting in the wings, when we bring him on in a second. That has a double-edged meaning for us. The first meaning, of course, is reclaiming the narrative about the war, But the second edge of it is reclaiming the narrative about the SCV, showing the world who we are, what we stand for, in a laid back way. And if we go to strictly a only log in thing, we're going to lose half of our roughly half of our goal. Yes, this is a show by members for members, but we're reaching on average close to 14,000 people a week across the world, across the globe. And yeah, a lot of them are SCV members, but I mean, a lot of them aren't as well. So it gives us a chance to do that. And of course, everybody's and of course everybody's asking about other platforms. It seems like a new social media platform coming up every single day, Rumble and Parler and this, that, and the other. And right now they don't have the built-in connections for us to be able to live stream. That's why we're also doing it on YouTube, but eventually we'll have our own place where we can do that. No matter what the social media no matter what the social media platforms have or don't have, we'll be able to do that in the long run. So that's that. Well, it is time for our weekly trivia question. We try to have a trivia question that kind of goes in with the theme or pokes at us. Case in point, last week's trivia question was to poke fun at the commander-in-chief down there. But this week is actually a one that is themed. And the trivia question is, even though Stonewall Jackson was tone deaf, what was his favorite hymn? And I believe, Mr. Producer, you've started an alarm. I know you're in the background, but give me a thumbs up if you got that going for us. All right, I got a thumbs up, all clear from him. So we're gonna wait a couple minutes for everybody to give a chance to answer.
Come on, you fat lord.
Okay, what was Sam Davis's
Hey, what did I do?
favorite tune?
On Jordan Banks, I think that's what you said.
Yeah, on Jordan Stormy Banks. I thought I would throw that in there. That's not part of the question, but you were mentioning hymns, and the night before they hung him, that was his mother's favorite tune, and that's what him and the jailers sang.
Well, and of course, everybody knows what Robert E. Lee's favorite hymn was. But we're getting some mixed answers in the chat. I'm seeing a lot of Amazing Graces, and I'm seeing one Rock of Ages, which is we'll talk about that in a second. As soon as we throw the answer up. All right, time ought to be up, Mr. Producer. Go ahead and throw the answer up.
Amazing Grace.
The correct answer is Amazing Grace. He didn't know why he liked it, like I said, being tone deaf, but it was reported as his favorite hymn. For Mr. Arthur, who said Rock of Ages, that was Jeb Stewart's favorite hymn. And How Firm a Foundation that John McLeish just typed in was Robert E. Lee's favorite. But definitely some good hymns. Well, we had him on last week, such a great job. We're bringing him on again now. You're familiar. You should be familiar if you watched him. We got Michael Hardy here. Michael, how are you doing this week?
Fantastic. How are y'all doing this week?
I'm doing fantastic as well.
Good.
think everybody else is muted, which, with this being Lee Jackson month, we talked about Lee one week. And of course, this week, our overall theme is Stonewall Jackson. And I, like we were messaging, I went through your blog the other day, Sunday, and just, luckily you're a great blogger because you put the topic link in there. So if read a lot about Stonewall Jackson in there, and I wish I would have gotten a copy of it, but I also saw that you wrote a book on North Carolina at Chancellorsville, which was of course Jackson's last battle. And that's what we kind of want to talk about is are some of the North Carolinians, excuse me, leading up to Chancellorsville, at Chancellorsville, and anything else you want to talk about with Jackson. Floor is yours.
All righty. Well, Jackson, let me go ahead and put out this question. Do you like Stonewall Jackson as a general? Jackson,
yes,
is kind of a mixed bag when it comes to being a general, and I'm sure all generals are like this. You have two Jacksons during the war. You have the Jackson of the Valley Campaign, you have Jackson of Second Manassas, you have Jackson of Chancellorsville, and then you've got the other Jackson, which, tell me about Jackson at Sharpsburg or Jackson at Fredericksburg. Those are kind of, we don't talk a whole lot about Jackson at those battles. And in 7 days, that campaign in June, late June of 1862, we don't talk very highly of Jackson during that battle, during that campaign. At one point during the Battle of White Oak Swamp, he got off his horse and took a nap, and the Federals got away. So Jackson is kind of a mixed bag, and Jackson's view among the soldiers is also a mixed bag. If you read their correspondence from the time that he died and later, they revered Jackson and what he was able to do, but they didn't necessarily like Jackson when they were marching 17, 18, 20 miles a day. They didn't much care for that Jackson because he was about to kill them. They were moving so hard and so fast. And so Jackson is kind of a mixed bag. He is one of my favorite generals. When he is exercising independent command, especially in those three battles that are campaigns that I already mentioned, the Valley in May 1862, the Battle of Second Manassas, and the Battle of Chancellorsville. And Chancellorsville, he's never quite independent of Lee, but he's out there on the flank by himself. Jackson is tremendous. I mean, he's one of the best that the South had in those situations. Many years ago, when I first moved to North Carolina, I was standing in the library at local university, and I was looking at regimental histories on the shelf. North Carolina had over 70 Confederate regiments. I don't actually have an ancestor from North Carolina in that time period. Mine had already all moved other places by the time we get to the 1860s. But I'm standing there looking at their collection. And with over 70 North Carolina Confederate regiments, there were about 6 that had histories written by the veterans themselves and 2 that had been written since the 1960s during the centennial. And so I decided I'm going to pick a regiment. I'm going to write about it. I picked a local regiment for where we were living at the time, the 37th North Carolina Troops, and off I went. Well, come to find out, the 37th Regiment was in the Branch-Lane Brigade. It was a brigade composed of all North Carolina regiments, the 7th, the 18th, the 28th, the 33rd, and the 37th Regiments. And they were one of the hardest fighting regiments in the Army of Northern Virginia, one of the hardest fighting brigades. I didn't know that when I first started this project, but and I was very naive. I thought I knew a lot about the war, And I told a publisher who wound up publishing the book that it would be 100,000 words and I'd be done in a year. And 5 years later and 150,000 words, I finally turned that manuscript in. And it was released, almost 20 years ago, probably 20 years ago. But that work kind of got my feet wet into the Branch-Lane Brigade and also in the Light Division in the Army of Northern Virginia. Now, pretty much all of my ancestry served in the Army of Tennessee. They were from Alabama and they were from Tennessee. And I grew up going to all of these reenactments in Georgia and a few in Alabama and other places over the years. So it was a new experience diving in deep into that history of battles and campaigns that the Army of Northern Virginia fought. And there are a lot of fantastic personalities from A.P. Hill to D.H. Hill, Longstreet, Jackson himself, Robert Rhodes, Ramseur, et cetera, et cetera. But Jackson's kind of special, and he achieved many things that other commanders never did. After he dies, his corps is kind of divided up, and they take some of Longstreet's corps and they create two new divisions, one under Ewell, one under A.P. Hill, and they don't do the things Jackson did. So Jackson's kind of unique in the annals of war. And I think Jackson deserves more credit than he gets overall. Jackson's corps, and of course, corps do not come until later in the war before he dies. But when we're fighting the Battle of Seven Pines, we don't have corps at that point in time. It's a divisional type organization. But Jackson had a lot of North Carolinians in his organization, and they were good soldiers by and large, really good soldiers. So Branch-Lane Brigade, commanded originally by Lawrence O'Brien Branch. He was a congressman from North Carolina. He was actually what real soldiers hate. He was a politician. He was a railroad president. He was a lawyer. And he was originally placed in command in eastern North Carolina, lost his first battle, the Battle of New Bern, in March of 1862. And that's when his brigade is organized after that battle. And he is sent to Virginia and lost his second battle as well, the Battle of Hanover Courthouse. So things don't look good for Branch. But while he's fighting at Hanover Courthouse, the War Department creates a new division and A.P. Hill is placed in command. And for the rest of the war, that brigade is under or is in the Light Division under A.P. Hill, and then under William Dorsey Pender, and finally Cadmus Wilcox. If you want a brigade that was at the forefront of everything, that would be the Branch-Lane Brigade. One newspaper editor writes in 1862 that the men need to stop being so brave because there won't be any of them left by the time the war is over to celebrate their notoriety. They are at the forefront of the vast majority of the battles that the Army of Northern Virginia are fighting. After the Battle of 7 Days, A.P. Hill's division is sent west into, not west, Western Theater, but they are sent following Jackson, and for the rest of the war are a part of Jackson's organization, eventually his corps. Battle of Cedar Mountain in August of 1862. It's Branch's brigade coming up the road that saves Jackson's line. His own brigade, the Stonewall Brigade, is melting, and Jackson sees Branch's brigade stacked on the road coming up the road, and they deploy in the woods to the left and advance and drive the Federals back and help secure that battlefield. Battle of Second Manassas, they are on the far Confederate left in reserve, and the Federals are attacking the Confederate left pretty hard. And as the line weakens, Branch comes leading his men a regiment at a time to plug holes in that part of the line. They're a part of A.P. Hill's Light Division in the march from Harper's Ferry to Sharpsburg and help save the Confederate Army that day. And General Branch is killed. They are fighting at Sharpsburg on September 17th, 1862. And they start looking around for a new commander and finally decide that the senior regimental commander of the brigade, James H. Lane, is the right man for the job. And he's Colonel of the 28th. He's a graduate of VMI, and he knew Jackson. Jackson was one of his professors when they were at the Institute, when Lane was a student at the Institute. So James H. Lane becomes brigade commander and commands the light division, or commands the brigade and at times the light division for the remainder of the war, even though he never actually becomes a major general. So that kind of sets the stage of Lane's brigade, Branch-Lane Brigade, sometimes called the 2nd North Carolina Brigade, as we move toward the Battle of Chancellorsville. Chancellorsville, the Federal Army under Joseph Hooker has crossed the river, the Rappahannock River, and they are on Lee's flank. Lee's at Fredericksburg. Federal cavalry under George Stoneman has been released into the rear of the Confederate Army to tear up railroads and telegraph lines to try and cut supplies. And Lee's army is kind of in a tight spot. He has sent 2 divisions of Longstreet's corps away down towards Suffolk and Norfolk in that area, both to gather supplies and to feed them. Lee's having a hard time trying to feed his army on the Rappahannock River in the first few months of 1863. So Lee has fewer men than he would normally have. Lee leaves a few men, brigades there at Fredericksburg because there are still Federal soldiers across the river. And he takes what's left and he turns toward Chancellorsville. And they approach toward the Chancellorsville house or the Chancellorsville farm there at the crossroads. Word comes back from scouts that the Federal flank is open. It's not anchored to anything. And Jackson has this idea of taking his men and attacking that flank. And a very famous, you might have seen the painting where Lee and Jackson are sitting there together. Lee turns to Jackson and says, well, what will you take with you? And Jackson says his entire corps. So that leaves Lee about a division to face the Federals from the eastern side. Jackson takes his corps, marches all the way around the Federal Army. Even though some Federals knew that and they tried to get their commanders to believe that Jackson was headed in that direction, the higher ups in the Army of Potomac basically say, no, they're retreating. I don't know why they'd be retreating in that direction, but they're retreating. And they don't believe the soldier in the ranks that something is going on. So late in the day, May 2nd, 1863, Jackson comes out on the Federal flank, and he puts 2 divisions on either side of the plank road late in the day and charges and basically rolls up the 11th Corps of the Army of the Potomac. The day is the attack is very successful. But as the day goes on and we start to get into the dusk time period, the Confederate Army, Jackson's corps, stops. Those 2 divisions stop. They're in the wilderness, very tangled undergrowth. The area had been stripped of timber over the years many times, and what was growing back was scrub and a lot of foliage, and it was very thick. So the Confederate soldiers were disorganized. They were, nobody knew whose command was where. It was getting dark, and so Confederate Army stops. Jackson's corps stops. But Jackson wants to continue the attack. And in that attack, his purpose is to cut the Federal. He wants to continue the attack at night. And his purpose his goal is to cut off the Federals from the United States forward, block their line of retreat. So Jackson looks down the road, and what does he see? He sees the light division under A.P. Hill. They are stacked on the road. They're stacked in a column of 4s on the road. And Jackson orders through A.P. Hill that 1st Brigade to deploy, and the 1st Brigade is under James H. Lane. This is the 1st Brigade in the line. And Lane's brigade starts to move forward. It's dark, even though the moon is just a night or so from being full, but you're in the wilderness. There's a lot of smoke. The woods are on fire. That's one of the things we don't think about Chancellorsville, but the woods are on fire. And Lane starts to move forward. As he does, there's an artillery engagement that erupts. And Lane's men basically hit the deck. And one of Hill's staff officers comes up and finds Lane and says, "Why are you not deploying?" And Lane basically says, "It's dark, the woods are thick, and the Federals are raking the road with artillery fire." And Lane comes up with the solution and he says, if you will go back and have Lane order the artillery to stop firing, maybe the Federals will stop firing. And that's exactly what happened. Staff officer goes back to AP Hill. Hill orders the battery to stop firing, and Lane is able to deploy. He places one regiment, the 33rd North Carolina, out in front. He places his 4 other regiments. He places the 37th and the 7th on the right of the road, and the 18th and the 28th on the left side of the road. And then Lane rides back to the rear, and he's looking for AP Hill. And he's looking for orders. I have my men deployed. What should we do next? But Lane does not find Hill. Lane finds Jackson. And as Lane says, many years after the war, and James H. Lane wrote more about Chancellorsville than he did any other battle he fought in. And as far as I know, Lane only visited battlefields in the East once after the war. He visited Fredericksburg and Chancellorsville. That's the only battlefields I can find that he visited. So Lane writes a lot about this battle. It obviously haunts him. It haunts him because what happens in the next few minutes, and it haunts him because on the following day, May 3rd, he loses half his brigade, including one of his brothers who were serving on his staff. So Lane tells us that he runs into Jackson, and Jackson asks him, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" And Lane says, "I'm looking for Hill for orders." And Jackson turns to Lane and says, "Lane, push right ahead." And that's a very common statement from Jackson. And maybe one of these days I'll actually sit down and try and document every single time that Jackson said, "Push right ahead." And maybe that's Jackson telling us here in 2021 about what we need to be doing. We need to be pushing right ahead. So Lane goes back to the far right of his line, where the 7th North Carolina is, to get the attack started. While this is going on, a couple of things happen, kind of all at once. Stonewall Jackson starts to ride down the Orange Plank Road. He goes, and the way the regiments are on the road, the 37th is just a little behind the 18th, but he rides by the left flank of the 37th Regiment, and there's a soldier of the 37th Regiment there who writes many years after the war and says, "Don't ride out there, you may get shot by your own men." And when I first got that story from the family, I'm like, oh my gosh, who wouldn't have told Jackson, "Don't ride out there, you may get shot by your own men"? But come to find out, this particular soldier is in Company D of the 37th, which is the last company on line, and he's acting second sergeant that day. So there's no other soldier that's going to be in that position to say to Jackson, "Don't ride out there, you may get shot by your own men," than this particular soldier. But Jackson rides on. He goes past the flank of the 18th, and he continues to ride down that road and toward the Federal lines. On the far, or out where the 33rd North Carolina is, there's a Federal soldier, a staff officer, who rides very close to their skirmish line and starts to cry out, "Is General Williams here? General Williams, where's General Williams?" Well, the captain of that company of the 33rd knows we don't have a General Williams. So he orders his men to fire in that direction. And the Federals start to return that fire with small arms and artillery. And Jackson has ridden, we don't quite know how far Jackson rides. There are different stories. One story is that he rides all the way to the skirmish line of the 33rd. He's listening to the Federals out there working. Another story says he actually rides beyond that skirmish line. He's out there in the no man's land in between. Some accounts have him staying on the plank roads. Some accounts have him on this little mountain road, smaller path there to the left of the Orange Plank Road. We don't really know. It's not really clear. But this exchange starts to take place, and Jackson is out there someplace near the skirmishers of the 33rd. If we go back to Lane, he's ridden to his right, furthermost regiment on the right, the 7th North Carolina. As he gets there, he discovers the lieutenant colonel of the 128th Pennsylvania. He's been captured. He's actually come with a white flag and says that I'm just out here trying to figure out who's in front of me, and Lane takes him prisoner. And the other men of the 128th Pennsylvania are out there crying, hey, we want our lieutenant colonel back, And Lane sends a Lieutenant Emack and 4 men in that direction, off to the Confederate right, to see what's going on. And these 5 men come upon 200 members of the 128th Pennsylvania. And Lieutenant Emack, there in the darkness, cries out something along the lines of, throw down your rifles. Jackson has you surrounded. We're getting ready to open fire. And almost 200 members of the 128th Pennsylvania surrender to those 5 guys. And they are marched to the rear. And Lane is seeing all this happen, and all of a sudden the skirmish starts to take place between the 33rd and the Federal skirmishers out in front. And Lane knows that there are more Federals to his right. The 7th let off a volley in that direction. The 37th let off a volley in that direction. You have the 18th and 28th on the other side of the road. And all of a sudden, Jackson figures out, and his staff figures out, oh, we're in a bad place. And they start to ride through the woods back to Confederate lines. Well, the 18th hear this. And one member of the 18th said earlier that with these men coming through the dry woods, it sounded like a brigade of cavalry coming through there in the night, in the darkness. And as Lane's brigade and A.P. Hill's division come up, they can see that there has already been one Federal cavalry charge during the day. There had been, and there were dead cavalrymen and dead horses along the route. So the 18th let off a smattering of a volley, and all of a sudden there's a voice that comes out of the darkness saying, more or less, stop firing, you're firing into your own men. And Lieutenant Colonel John D. Barry, or Major John D. Barry, cries out, who gave that order? It's a lie, or it's a damn lie. Pour it into them. And the 18th let off another volley. And they mortally wound Stonewall Jackson there in the darkness. A.P. Hill is also out there, much closer to the 18th's lines, but he survives the volley, even though it decimates the majority of his staff. A.P. Hill rushes ahead, and he finds Jackson wounded, sends for an ambulance. We know the rest of the story, that Jackson would eventually die of his wounds on May 10th of 1863. Jackson, when members of the brigade, one of them writes that when that order was read at dress parade, that announcement was read at dress parade, probably on the morning of May 11th, 1863, he said there was not a dry eye. Here you have all of these young but battle-hardened and sunburnt men weeping like children that, Jackson has died. Question always asked question always asked to me are the repercussions for the Branch-Lane Brigade. There are some folks who do blame Lane for this, but Lane writes later that in talking with A.P. Hill that he'll never put any blame on Lane and his brigade. There's also discussion about how this particular incident kept Lane from becoming a major general. before the war ended. And I can argue against that. Both of the people who were promoted to command the Light Division, William Dorsey Pender, outranked James H. Lane. And also, after Pender is mortally wounded at Gettysburg, Cadmus Wilcox. Wilcox is senior, while he's not a member of the Light Division. He was one of the oldest brigadier generals by rank in the Army of Northern Virginia at that time. Plus, Wilcox had a brother who was in the Confederate Congress, as Confederate senator. So he has political connections that James H. Lane never did. And that says a lot about how promotion works in the Confederate Army, is having those political connections. High promotion works. Lane survives the war. He is wounded. He is shot in the groin in 1864 and misses several months worth of combat, but does rejoin the Army in the fall of 1864 and continues right up until the very end. He surrenders at Appomattox Courthouse in April of 1865. He goes back to teaching and teaches several places, but finally winds up at Alabama Polytechnical Institute, which is now Auburn University, and teaches there for the rest of his life, and very important member of the faculty there at that school, and eventually dies, and he's buried there at Pine Hill Cemetery in Auburn. And his house still survives there. Used to be owned by a gardening club in Auburn. I hope it still is, but a little bit about North Carolina, but I will open it up. Do you have any questions? Because I can ramble for hours.
Well, I did have 4 things that I wanted to bring up. 2 of them are from reading your blog, and I'll go to those later. But the first one, you mentioned the mortally wounding, and we kind of had this discussion the other day via a text. But I'm the Jackson and the compress, the wet compress that he had when McGuire was passed out. Just you to talk about that and your take on it, because I believe that's what ended up setting in the pneumonia and killing him.
As we've kind of alluded to, Jackson was pretty weird. He was strange in the way that he ate, and he had these weird, we would term weird, beliefs in the human body and medical conditions and everything. I think if I remember right, Jackson's one of the few generals who tried to bathe every day. I think I read that someplace at some time. And then there's, the very famous story of Jackson who would ride around with his hand up in the air like this until a bullet clipped his finger at the Battle of First Manassas, and he was not as keen to do that anymore. Jackson and the idea of pneumonia, of course, that's what killed him. But there's an idea that, he woke up in the middle of the night one night and got a cold compress. He was complaining, and Dr. McGuire was passed out because he'd been up like 3 days. And that has some validity. But the thing that we were talking about, Jackson is riding around on the night that he is wounded, May 2nd, 1863. And he has on a, for lack of a better word, a rain slicker, or, a rubber poncho. And if you've ever been to VMI and been to their museum, you can see that. At least was on display. I've not been to VMI in a while, but it was on display. So maybe Jackson was already not feeling well, or had a cold or something, a cold that's not come down to us in what's left of the record. I think both of those are plausible explanations about the pneumonia, that it was brought on by the cold compress, or maybe something was going on with him before he was wounded. There's no chance for rain that night on May 2nd. It's really dry. It's not all that cold. But what was your next question?
Well, the next thing I wanted to talk about was, kind of going into Lane, when you wrote your article, your blog post about the I think it was called Requiem for Stonewall Jackson.
Mhm.
And you talk about the different services that were held, and you specifically mentioned I believe it was the brigade one on May 17th, where they pull that verse out of Ecclesiastes. That
Right.
and of course, when I read it, I was reading it as kind of an admonishment, or at least I took it as an admonishment. On the men, which of course, if it was a fire and brimstone preacher, but is there any proof that Lane would have been there at that service? And if so, I mean, surely it could be argued that right after, he's already living with that guilt, and then a man of God, reading that particular verse, really would have, at least in my mind, would have really stood out.
It's
Just wanted
possible
your take
that,
on it.
yeah. I can't say one way or the other that Lane was there. It's we who grew up going to reenactments, when the crowds leave on Saturday night and the camp's closed to the public, we go out and we mingle and talk to folks and everything. Well, it doesn't quite work that way with 60 or 70,000 Confederate soldiers. And while they did visit each other's camps from time to time, that's the question. I don't have an answer for this, but the question is, how close was Jackson's Stonewall Brigade's camp to where James H. Lane's camp was that evening? And I'll have to go back and track that and try and find that. So it's possible that Lane heard that. But anytime you do Confederate research, as all y'all gentlemen know, we've got more holes and questions than we do answers. And we have to try and do the best that we can. There was a lot of debate, and this is not a part of your question, but as Jackson is there, wounded and dying, and his wife arrives, there's a lot of debate about where he's going to be buried. And there was actually some discussion of, if he didn't make it, of taking his body to Charlotte, North Carolina for burial. His wife was from that area. Her father had been president of Davidson College, which is just north of Charlotte. It's where D.H. Hill is buried, there in the little town of Davidson, North Carolina. The Jackson and his wife were married in Lincolnton, North Carolina, or Lincoln County, North Carolina, at her father's house. So they discussed that for a while about actually bringing Jackson's remains, if he were to die, back to North Carolina and possibly interring them in Charlotte. Of course, we know that didn't happen, and he is interred at the Stonewall Jackson Cemetery in Lexington.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I knew that Anna was from North Carolina, and I believe her father was also a Presbyterian minister.
He was.
As well, because I know his first wife, yeah. So I knew that. I thought that was right, that he married two preachers' daughters, which goes into his spiritual, some modern day would say fanaticism, but his
Right.
spiritual beliefs. The next thing I was going to ask you about is the one you posted on December 1st this last year about the band biography.
Yes.
So I really found that so interesting, because when you think about, or at least when I think about printing in the 1860s, setting block type and all of that, but I didn't realize, first of all, that the biography came out just months after his death. But anyway, I'll let you talk about it for a second.
Well, the biography is actually being written before Jackson dies. And it was being written by John Coke, or Cook, but Coke. And he's working on this biography of Jackson in his life, because, ever since the Battle of First Manassas, Jackson has this fame that is attached to his name. You know, there stands Jackson like a stone wall, rally behind the Virginians or rally on the Virginians. And Jackson has this notoriety. He's famous. And Jackson, you know, people are writing about him. He's in the newspapers a lot. And Coke starts to write this biography, and then all of a sudden Jackson gets killed. And Coke finishes the biography, and it was published June, July of 1863. It starts to appear as advertisements in local newspapers. Well, somebody grabs a copy and takes it up north. And a New York publisher by the name of Charles B. Richardson releases a copy of The Life of Stonewall Jackson in September of 1863. And Richardson had actually ordered 10,000 copies of that biography. And it's advertised. I found it advertised in newspapers in Indiana, in places like Milwaukee and Wisconsin and Louisville and Chicago. Everybody wants a copy of this book, and it's a bestseller up north. I think I found, and this is not quite in the article, but I think I found where it was reprinted a couple of times. Well, the Federals get perturbed that this pirated copy of Stonewall Jackson is so popular. And if you look at some of the places where it's being advertised, at places like Indiana and Illinois, the lower halves of both of those states are extremely Democratic in their party affiliations. There are a lot of Southerners who have come out of the South and moved to Indiana and Illinois. And it's very popular there. It's very popular in Missouri. Well, the federal government, especially agents out St. Louis, Louisville, those areas, actually start banning books. And there was a federal general. Let's see if I can find his name. I don't see it right off. But there's a long list of books that they actually ban, including The Life of Stonewall Jackson, Pollard's Southern History of the War, and that book we now know as The Lost Cause. But Pollard is publishing, he's a newspaper editor in Richmond, and he's publishing a history of the war year by year. So that book is banned. Official Reports of the Confederate Government is banned. And then there are some of these others I'm not as familiar with, like Abraham, Book of the Prophet Stephen. That's one that I don't know a whole lot about. The Lincoln Catechism, or a Guide to the Presidential Election of 1864, is banned. Indestructible Organics. I still need to find that and figure out what that book is, because I don't have a clue. Didn't look that one up. But those books are all banned by the federal provost marshal in St. Louis, and they are ordered to be seized. So not only do we have the federal government arresting people left and right, throwing them in jail for speaking out against the government, not only is the federal government packing the Supreme Court, adding new justices, there's a 10th justice that is added, but we have the federal government is threatening and probably arresting people and throwing them in jail for having books of a certain persuasion. So
history repeats itself.
I'm sorry?
I said history repeats itself.
Oh, very much so, very much so. And history is always repeating itself.
History repeats itself.
Now, to take this article and go further, we need to dive into the federal provost marshal records and see who got arrested for what. And I'm not so sure how many of those are online, but that's where that article needs to go further and see how many people are getting thrown in jail under this charge of having illegal books or banned books.
Hey, Michael, I've got a question.
That's definitely, like we said, just the little tidbits that are.
Yes, sir.
First of all, thank you for coming on again 2 weeks in a row. I enjoy your talks on Sunday night. Thank you for doing those.
Sure.
And thank you for coming back tonight. I've got a question for you, and it was concerning what you mentioned earlier in your talk
Mhm.
about the Branch-Lane Brigade,
Yes.
in which somebody said something or wrote an article, wrote a piece, telling them to stop fighting so hard because there was not going to be enough left of them
Yes.
for. Yeah, would you mind going a little bit more detail, or maybe who threw that out, who wrote that little piece? Was it in a newspaper
It's
or?
a newspaper article. Um, when you go back and look at the list of battles from Hanover Courthouse all the way through, like Gaines Mill during the 7 days, um, Colonel Lee of the 37th was killed. One of the other colonels of the 33rd is killed during those battles, and just the casualty numbers that are going through. I mentioned the being involved at Cedar Mountain or Cedar Run. That battle has different names. They were, at the forefront of that battle. They were at Second Manassas. They were involved in the capture of Harper's Ferry. They were at Ox Hill or Chantilly right after Second Manassas. And so their casualty numbers are considerably higher than a lot of the other regiments and brigades in the Army of Northern Virginia at that point in time. So it's like if there's a crisis situation going on, if one part of the line is beginning to weaken, they call for Branch's brigade to come up and plug that hole in that line. They are some of the more fierce fighters in the Army of Northern Virginia, and they continue to be, whether it's there, at the attack. And I mentioned on May 3rd of 1863 at Chancellorsville, Lane lost half of his brigade. I mean, they are killed or wounded in that fighting. At Gettysburg, they're in that second line on July 3rd, going across that field, what some folks call Pickett's Charge. They're also involved on day one at Gettysburg. And that list goes on and on and on. One of my favorite accounts, and I think probably one of the best services, is during the Battle of Spotsylvania Courthouse on May 12th. They helped save Lee's army twice in one day. That morning during the breakthrough, it occurs to Lane's left, and he actually refuses part of the brigade. There, you would have the bloody angle running off, and Lane is fighting in that direction and fighting in that direction that morning. And he actually at one point orders his men over the breastworks and charges the Federals on the other side and helps stymie that attack. Well, they come back after that charge and find that their hole has been taken by another brigade. And so they shift down to below Heath Salient. That afternoon, same day, there's a Federal artillery battery out in front that is enfilading the Confederate line. And here comes Robert E. Lee. And he sends out some of the sharpshooter battalion, some scouts from Lane's brigade, and comes back to Lee and says the battery is unsupported. And Lee orders Lane's brigade to attack. And Lane's brigade not only captures that battery, but at that same moment, Burnside has launched his attack against the Confederate line. And Lane's brigade slams into that front rank of 17th Michigan and 51st Pennsylvania and pretty much destroy both of those regiments. And Burnside stops his attack because he thinks the rest of the Confederate army is coming up on his flank. And so I'm of the opinion that had Burnside's attack pressed forward, those two fairly fresh Federal divisions would have crushed the rest of the Confederate line. We'd been fighting all day long, and so twice in one day, Lane's men helped stop Federal advances at the Battle of Spotsylvania Courthouse. And that list just goes on and on and on and on. They were involved in over 35 battles and skirmishes during the war. Almost 9,000 men served in the Army, served in that particular brigade. And I have to read my own book to find my numbers. But There were thousands of them that were killed or wounded, or that were killed. Roughly about 35% of the brigade died during the war, either in battle or of disease, or in a federal prison camp.
Do you mind taking a moment and kind of telling us about that book? Tell us the title of it, when you wrote it. That's talking about the Lane Brigade.
It's called General Lee's Immortals, Branch-Lane Brigade, the battles and campaigns of the Branch-Lane Brigade in the Army of Northern Virginia. It was published by Savis Beatty and came out about 2.5 years ago. It was published in 2018. And you can go to my website and order a copy.
Yeah.
Or you can go to Savis Beatty and order a copy.
Yeah. If you don't mind, I'd like to mention one more thing, or ask one more thing and get your opinion on it.
Sure.
I've read Leaves of a Confederate Soldier. It was written by Randolph H. McKim, and he served under Stonewall.
Yes.
And he made several comments in there about Jackson's men were pretty much foot cavalry.
Yes.
And how much they marched. He talked about them doing somewhere in there like 32 miles nonstop one day or into the night over a 2-day period, something like that. Can you mind commenting on anything like that?
Jackson would move like that. He had a prescribed rest every hour. Like, you would march for 50. I've seen this change and I've seen different accounts, but you would march for like 55 minutes and you would rest for 5 minutes. And then you would keep going like that throughout the day. And Jackson did cover phenomenal amounts of distance. To get, a good example is on when Jackson is heading toward Manassas Depot and captures Manassas Depot. That they are covering 20 plus miles a day to get around the flank of the Federal Army, and just amazing amounts of ground that they have covered, more so probably than any other Confederate Army group out there. And I will confess, I've not studied the Trans-Mississippi Department very much with E. Kirby Smith and some of those commanders, but I mean, they're just covering a phenomenal amount of space. And like I said earlier, some folks are critical of it. William Dorsey Pender, a brigade commander at the time, writes to his wife that, Jackson, I paraphrase, but Jackson sure knows how to use up an army by the way that he's marching. But they did achieve some remarkable things, and his tactics are still studied.
I've also heard the same thing mentioned many times. I just wanted to ask, get your thoughts on it. You've studied it a great deal more than I have. And again, thank you for coming on. Thank you for what you're doing on Sunday nights. I enjoy those. And thank you for coming on. Thank you for taking the time to answer my question.
Sure.
Yeah, speaking of questions, there's one on the screen that Jason Lloyd asked, and it's a really great question because you kind of touched on it a little bit in your blog post about pretty much Lee reassigning several officers, including Magruder, who's mentioned it specifically by name, but also S.D. Lee, who were in the Army of Northern Virginia. But after he, fully takes over, he, pushes them out somewhat.
Mm-hmm. And he does. Well, Jason asked a great question about Jackson and the 7 days. And White Oak Swamp is not Jackson's only, I don't want to say failure because that's too harsh of a word. Jackson overestimate at that point in time, at the start of the 7 days battle, Jackson overestimates what his men can do. They are physically exhausted, and because they're coming from the valley, they've been fighting different federal groups in the valley. And by the time they get close to the Army of Northern Virginia, this is June 1862, they're tired. Jackson is tired. And there's a great discussion about how they are on limited supplies, limited rations. So it's really affecting their combat effectiveness. Those are some big 50-cent words there. So even at the very start of the 7 days campaign, Jackson does not get in the position that Lee has assigned him, that Jackson himself has agreed to be in. He's on a wrong road. He's just, everybody's waiting for him to launch this flank attack on the first day of the campaign, and Jackson never quite gets into position. And AP Hill, Branch is also involved in this because Branch's brigade is the link between Jackson's men coming in and the rest of Hill's division. And Branch gets word that Jackson is close by, and he wasn't that close. And Branch launches his attack, and then AP Hill launches his attack. And that first day of the battle, of the 7 days battle, doesn't turn out all that well for Lee. So it's not just White Oak Swamp that Jackson is not performing the way that he had in the Shenandoah Valley just a few weeks earlier. Jackson, as I said, is tired. At White Oak Swamp, he gets off his horse and he takes a nap because he is just mentally and physically exhausted. So that's kind of an answer to Jason's question. Any other questions?
All right. Well, the last thing I wanted to bring up, and it kind of it does link back to last week, when when Lee and Jackson were on their deathbeds and they were both in their state of delirium, they both called for AP Hill. Of course, Hill was dead by the time Lee died, and you talked about AP Hill where he was at Chancellorsville, and I was reading it's the Great Partnership. It came out maybe last year, year before, which studied Jackson Lee partnership, and in there the author kind of alludes to Jackson and AP Hill's relationship. And I'm a big, when I have done research on the Army of Northern Virginia, besides one specific unit, the 16th Mississippi, which was the only Mississippi unit in Jackson's Valley Army, or Army of the Valley, excuse me. It has been on the relationship, the military family between Jackson, Lee, and Stewart, but I've never done anything researched on Jackson, Lee, and Little Powell Hill, and just wanted your, anything you can share light on that.
Well, Jackson had Hill arrested. They didn't get along very well. After the 7 days, Hill and Longstreet have a falling out, and this is the short version of that story. And they think it's going to be a duel between Hill and Longstreet, and Lee kind of steps in and shuffles AP Hill and the Light Division off to Jackson's command, so he's not under Longstreet's command anymore. And Jackson had a way of having his subordinates arrested for various infractions, and Hill is actually under arrest. And in that situation, it's much more Jackson's fault than it was Hill's. Jackson had given Hill orders to move at a certain time. There's actually two different times that this happens. And in the last time, Hill's up, he's got his men ready to go, but there are other troops on the road in front of him. And so Hill just waits. Instead of busting up somebody's line in their line of march, Hill just waits. And Jackson had issued additional orders in the middle of the night, but did not told Hill. And Jackson rides up to Hill, and I'm paraphrasing this, but Jackson rides up to Hill, want to know why Hill's not moving. Hill says, well, I got these orders. And, Jackson says, I sent other orders. And Hill basically quits on the spot, offers Jackson his sword. And Jackson tells Hill to consider yourself under arrest. And Lawrence O'Brien Branch takes command of the Light Division. And it is Branch who was commanding the Light Division as they crossed the Potomac River during the Maryland campaign. They later kind of have a couple of people approach Jackson and say, well, you need your best general commanding your best division as we go into battle, and Jackson reinstated Hill to his command, but Hill wanted a trial, wanted to clear his name, and Jackson winds up getting killed before that ever really comes out. So Jackson has a lot of problems with a lot of his junior commanders throughout his tenure. And Jackson has a couple of problems with commanders over him. There's one point that Jackson actually resigns very early in the war. Something that's not gone the way that he wants it to go, and Jackson, hey, y'all go do what you want. I'll go home. And they kind of smooth that over as well.
Yeah, my boy Judah P. was kind of involved with Jackson's resignation.
Yeah.
All I can say is if Hood and Bragg had thrown all the men underneath them and that did not follow their orders, there would not have been a person to lead the Army of Tennessee.
Very much so.
Nobody followed anything they did. Also, I know you mentioned they mentioned A.P. Hill as Jackson and Lee passed. I can't remember if Anna wrote it, his wife Anna wrote it, or his Dr. McGuire wrote it, that I believe Jackson called for Pendleton within the last couple of days, and one of his instructions was to move Pendleton to the front. I can't remember which one of them wrote that in which one of their books, and I don't have it in front of me because I can't quote it, but I do remember them calling for Pendleton, especially as Jackson was going in and out because of the fever. So, that proves they were all generals to the end, and they fought the war until they died.
Right.
So that's just my opinion.
Very much so. And I was a part of a discussion
and
the
the reason
night.
why I was trying to. Well, what I was saying is the reason why I was bringing that up in the Great Partnership, the author writes that during the ambulance ride, or maybe while he was waiting for the ambulance, A.P. Hill actually has Jackson's head resting in his lap, trying to make him comfortable. During that, I can't remember if it was while waiting on the ambulance or during the ride, and
to my understanding, that's actually right after he is wounded. A.P. Hill finds Jackson there in the woods, and Hill has Jackson's head cradled in his lap. They put him on the ambulance, or they put him on the stretcher and start bearing him through the woods. And then there's, small arms and artillery fire, and a couple of those stretcher bearers are taken out. And Jackson is actually dumped on the ground at one point before they can get to the ambulance. And then Hill is wounded not long after that. And some folks want to put Hill's wounding by the 18th, but Hill was actually wounded by a Federal artillery shell fragment across both of the back of his calves. And it's at that point that Hill realizes that he cannot exercise tactical command, and they send for Jeb Stuart.
Yeah. But that's all I had for mine. Stuff I wanted to bring up. Anybody else have anything?
Yeah, I saw what Jason Lloyd put on there that Jackson called upon Hawks on his deathbed. If I'm right, that was in Jackson's last few minutes that he actually called upon Hawks. I think the Pendleton deal was on the 9th or something like that, according to maybe what Anna said.
Right.
But yes, Hawks was actually brought up. One of the last statements that Jackson made right before crossing over the river and resting in the shade of the trees, I think he was calling up Hawks then. Is that correct?
That's the way I remember it, but I'd have to go look it up to be sure.
And just really quick, because somebody is asking for clarification on who Hawks was.
Wasn't he one of Jackson's staff officers?
I want he wasn't chief of artillery, but he was a staff officer. And I would have to look it up. I think it's HAWKES. Yeah, that's what it's on here. I tell you the truth, I don't remember. Of course, Pendleton was artillery, and maybe that's the reason why I've got that on my mind. But I was thinking Hawks was maybe just a staff officer.
That's kind of what I thought as well. But most of these generals have a lot of staff officers.
Yeah, Jason Lloyd has on it. He was commissary. Yeah.
Yes. Well, J. Hawks, Major Commissary in under Jackson's command.
Every general wants a quartermaster.
Any other questions for me?
Well, if there's I'm good. Again, on behalf of the entire panel and everybody watching, again, thanks for 2 weeks coming on. And I know I speak for the entire panel when I say you are welcome back at any time. Definitely want to have you on when the new book about feeding the Army comes out. On there, the chat who are wanting to get a copy of your books, we of course got your website, michaelchardy.com. I know you can get them there. You mentioned that. And again, I just appreciate it. I appreciate you coming on. I mean, that's, you've made 2 great episodes starting out our year that we just got to continue to set the bar even higher. So I appreciate it. Deeply, deeply do.
Well, thank you so much.
Probably after, we'll probably, would love to have you on, especially because you've written about Petersburg. We do have an episode on the fall of Petersburg coming up in April, but we'll talk about that. We could talk about that a little bit later on, if over after the stream. So, and then Craig Bourne is asking, how do people get to watch your Sunday talks?
If you go to my personal
really
Facebook
quickly.
page, Michael C. Hardy, just join up. It starts at 8:30 Eastern time. And sometimes I have topics I want to talk about, and sometimes I just open it up for questions. And you can ask anything you would like. I can't guarantee I'll have an answer for you, but maybe I can direct you to an answer. We have a wonderful history here in the South, and it's a very rich history and a very deep history. But as we were talking about earlier today, we seem to retell the same stories all the time, and there's a lot of other interesting stories out there. And I try and dig into some of those smaller stories. And that's one of the things that I do on the blog, Looking for the Confederate War, is trying to tell some of those smaller stories. So come on Facebook and check me out until they kick me off.
Yeah, and if you go, and the blog thing, it'll take you to. That's why we just lumped it in with just with your website, because that easier for everybody to do it that way. Just really quickly in closing, there's some upcoming events we wanted to remind everybody of. March 7th is, as declared by the Confederation, Confederate Flag Day. As that day, more than likely, observances will be held on the 6th of March. So get out there and raise a flag and show your pride. For the Army of Tennessee, March 27th in Gunnersville, Alabama, is the AOT workshop. I spoke to Army Commander Jimmy Hill. We will be broadcasting part of the workshop here on SCV chat. Some of it there's 2 segments of there we'll not be broadcasting. So if you want to get the entire thing, just go ahead and do that. If you need a registration form, they're online. You could probably contact your division commander, private message the Facebook page or our page as a last second. our last chance, and we can email it over to you. It's $10 registration before. Well, it's $10 registration, but if you register before, I believe March 10th, you're included in lunch. If not, it can't be guaranteed. And the big final one is May 1st. It was announced last week. We want to remind everybody, May 1st is the first annual pilgrimage to Elm Springs and Confederate Memorial Service, National Confederate Memorial Service up there. It's going to be a good day to be Southern, praying for good weather. I believe it was discussed that around maybe 10 or 11 o'clock, there's going to be laying of wreaths and just a bunch of stuff up there at Elm Springs for us to all enjoy. So definitely, keep tuning in to the program. 11 o'clock. I see the fingers. Yeah, definitely tune in to hear, read a veteran, as I'm sure it'll be in there. Continue to check the Telegraph, be informed, be educated, because that's how we win this war against this cancel culture. But until then, next week we'll be back. Next week, with it being February 1st, we're going to talk about Black Confederate history. Should be a good, interesting topic. So definitely tune in for that. And until then, remember, in the words of No Fumar,
No Fumar in the elevator.
More in the elevator.
Yeah, no Fumar in the elevator.